There are words that are not just words. There are words that carry a history behind them so specific and so weighted that when they land in a room, the room knows immediately, not after reflection, not after analysis, but immediately in the gut exactly what has been said and what it means about the person who said it. This story is about one of those words, said on a game show stage in front of a live audience, and about what happened in the 30 seconds that followed. It is about a family who had come to have a good time and found themselves, instead, in a moment that required something harder than fun. It is about a host who has built a career on joy and laughter and who, when the moment asked him to be something other than that, stepped into it without flinching. And it is about what it means to be in a room when something wrong is said, not to you, but in front of you, and what your response to that moment says about who you are. If you believe that every person who walks through a door brings their full humanity with them and deserves to have it treated accordingly, then this story is going to mean something to you. Hit that like button and subscribe right now, because stories about dignity and the people who refuse to let it be taken are exactly what we are here for, and we come back with one every single week. Now let us talk about what happened, and who was in the room when it happened, and why it still matters. The Jackson family from Atlanta, Georgia, were, in the most accurate and complete sense of that phrase, a family that had made something out of nothing, and not in the motivational speech version of that story where the nothing is temporary and the something arrives quickly. In the real version where the nothing is long and hard and the something is built slowly, through decades of choices that cost more than they showed on the outside. The team captain was 49-year-old Cheryl Jackson, who had grown up in the Vine City neighborhood of Atlanta, a neighborhood that had seen everything a neighborhood can see and was still standing, which told you something important about the people who had chosen to stay and build there rather than leave when leaving would have been easier. Cheryl had grown up in a 2-bedroom house with her parents, her grandmother, and 3 siblings. She had gotten herself through college on a combination of scholarships, work study, and the specific determination of someone who understands viscerally what education can change, because she has seen what its absence costs. She was now, at 49, a licensed clinical social worker who ran a nonprofit organization in Atlanta that provided mental health services to low-income families, specifically to children and teenagers in underserved communities who would not otherwise have access to any mental health support at all. She had built it from a single office and herself to a staff of 22 and a reach that touched thousands of families every year. Her husband, Marcus, 52, was a high school football coach who had spent 24 years turning 17-year-old boys into people who understood something about discipline, about showing up, and about what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. He had produced 3 college athletes and 1 NFL draft pick and had, by his own accounting, affected the lives of several hundred young men in ways that statistics could not fully capture. Their son Jalen, 24, was a first-year law student who had his mother's precision and his father's competitive fire, and who had, in the weeks before the taping, given himself a 30-day crash course in Family Feud strategy using a spreadsheet he had built tracking the most common survey answers by category. Their daughter Amara, 21, was a junior in college studying architecture, and she had the particular combination of analytical rigor and spatial creativity that her professors had been noting with enthusiasm since her first semester. The 5th member of the team was Cheryl's mother, 74-year-old Ruth, who had raised 4 children in Vine City with her husband before he passed, who still attended the same church she had joined in 1973, and who had a particular kind of stillness about her that came from having lived long enough to understand which things were worth disturbing and which things were not. They had applied to Family Feud because Amara had entered them as a birthday gift for Cheryl, who had mentioned once, in passing, the way people mention things they do not expect to be taken literally, that it had always looked like fun. Amara had filled out the application the next day and told her mother about it 3 months later when the selection call came in. Cheryl's reaction had been the reaction of a woman who recognizes a thoughtful gesture even when it arrives in a form she was not expecting. They had practiced. Ruth had been informed of the practice sessions and had attended them with the composed participation of a woman who does not require coaching, but who loves her grandchildren enough to let them believe they are preparing her for something. The competing family that day was the Aldridge family from a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. 5 of them, a mother, 2 adult daughters, and 2 sons-in-law, who had come with the easy, comfortable confidence of a family whose members had spent their entire lives in spaces that were built for them, and had therefore never had occasion to question whether they belonged anywhere they chose to go. The team captain was 46-year-old Stephanie Aldridge, who was pleasant and quick, and who played the first round of the game with a genuine competitiveness that made her a fair opponent. Her daughter Kelsey, 24, was fast and funny. The other family members were agreeable and participated without distinguishing themselves particularly. The family was, in short, exactly what most Family Feud families are, a reasonable collection of people who had shown up to have fun and win some money and were doing both with varying degrees of success. The problem was not the Aldridge family. The problem was Stephanie's son-in-law, a 29-year-old named Cody, who had the energy of someone who had spent enough time in certain internet spaces to have developed a set of opinions about certain things, and who had, somewhere along the way, confused being edgy with being funny, and had stopped noticing that the two things were not the same. He was not stupid. He was not, in the ordinary run of his day, probably what anyone would call a bad person. He was someone who had been allowed to say certain things in certain rooms for long enough that he had stopped thinking carefully about what those things actually did when they landed somewhere outside those rooms. The first round was close and well played. Both families were energetic and competitive. The audience was engaged. Steve Harvey was in the warm, quick-moving groove of a host who knows that this is going well and can feel the room responding to the energy. The Jacksons were excellent. Jalen's spreadsheet preparation was clearly paying off. Amara was giving answers that hit. Marcus was steady and reliable. And Ruth, who had not needed the practice sessions, gave 2 answers in the first round that landed in the top spots with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has been living among human beings for 74 years and has consequently developed an accurate model of what they tend to think and want and fear. It was during the brief technical pause between the second and third rounds, the kind of pause that happens in live tapings when adjustments need to be made, and the formal action is suspended for a moment, that Cody said it. He had been making small asides throughout the taping, comments delivered to his family at a volume that was technically private but was, in a room full of ambient microphones and in proximity to people with ears, not actually private. Most of his earlier comments had been unremarkable. This one was not. He looked at the Jackson family across the stage, at Cheryl in her burgundy blazer, at Ruth sitting with her hands folded, at Jalen and Amara laughing at something their father had said. And he made a comment about the way the family was celebrating an answer they had just gotten, and he used the word ghetto to describe it. He said it in the particular tone that word gets used in when the person using it wants maximum impact from minimum syllables. He said it to his wife, who looked at the floor. He did not say it loudly. He said it exactly loud enough. Cheryl Jackson heard it. She was 4 years into running a nonprofit in Atlanta. She had spent 4 years before that as a social worker in the Atlanta public school system. She had spent the 45 years before that being a black woman in America. She had heard that word before. She had heard it used in exactly that tone before. She knew what it meant and she knew what it was intended to do, and she felt it do the thing it was intended to do in the moment it was said, with the specific and familiar weight of something that finds the same place in you every time, no matter how many times you have already been hit there. Her face did not change. Her posture did not change. She looked at Steve Harvey. She breathed. She waited. Ruth beside her had also heard it. Ruth did not change her expression either, but she reached over without looking and put her hand on top of Cheryl's hand for exactly 3 seconds. Then she removed it. They did not look at each other. They did not need to. That hand on that hand said everything there was to say between the two of them about what had just happened and what they were going to do about it, which was to stand up straight and not give it anything it had not already taken. Steve Harvey had heard it. He had been standing near the center of the stage when the comment reached him, and there was a specific, visible change in how he was holding himself in the moment after it registered, not an explosion of emotion, not a telegraphed reaction that announced itself to the room before he had decided what he was going to do with it. It was more like a settling, like something in him went from one state to another without passing through a transition. He looked at Cody. He did not look away. He held that look for exactly long enough that Cody, who had been looking somewhere else, became aware of it and turned to meet it and found in Steve Harvey's face something that was not warm and was not angry and was not going anywhere. Then Steve looked at Cheryl, then at Ruth, then back at Cody. Then he walked to the center of the stage with the deliberate pace of someone who has decided exactly what the next several minutes are going to contain. "Need to stop for a second," he said. His voice was completely level. He was not performing control, he had it. "Because something was just said that I heard, and I am going to respond to it, because this is my stage and I am responsible for what happens on it, and I am not going to pretend I didn't hear it." The studio went still. The production team, reading the shift in the room, went still too. A word was just used to describe this family, Steve said. He did not repeat the word. He did not need to. Everyone in the room already knew exactly which word he meant and exactly what weight it carried. And I want to address it directly because I think the person who said it may not fully understand what they said. He paused. Or maybe they do, I don't know. But either way, I'm going to say what I'm about to say because there are people standing on this stage who deserve to hear it said out loud in this room. He looked at the Jackson family, not at Cody, at the Jacksons. What I see when I look at this family, he said, is a woman who built a nonprofit from nothing that serves thousands of families in Atlanta. A man who has spent 24 years shaping young men into people worth knowing. Two young people who are building something. And a grandmother who has been in more rooms than most of us will ever see and is still here, still standing, still the most composed person on this stage. He looked at Ruth specifically when he said that last part. Ruth received it with the still face of someone who has been described accurately. That is what I see. He turned toward Cody, not with heat, with the particular directness of someone who has something specific to say and is going to say all of it. That word you used, Steve said. I want you to think about what that word actually does, not what you meant by it. I'm not talking about your intention. I'm talking about what it does when it lands. It says, I have looked at you and I have decided that the thing I want to say about you is a word that has been used to make people like you feel small for a very long time. It says, your joy is a problem. The way you celebrate is too much. The way you take up space is too much. He paused. That is not a joke. That is a message, and the message is wrong. Cody started to say something. Steve let him begin the sentence and then continued, without raising his voice, without any aggression, simply talking as a man who has something he intends to finish saying and is going to finish saying it. I'm not asking you to feel a particular way about what I just said. I'm asking you to sit with it. That's all. Just sit with it and think about what you actually know about the people standing across from you before you reach for a word like that to describe them. The room was very quiet. And I want to say one more thing, Steve continued, and now he was addressing the audience as much as anyone specifically on stage. This show has had millions of families come through here over the years. Every background, every state, every kind of story you can imagine. And the one thing that has been true about every single family that has ever stood on this stage, every single one, is that they brought their whole lives with them when they walked in that door. Their history, their work. Everything they have built and survived and carried, that does not change based on what anybody says about them in a pause between rounds. It does not get smaller because someone reaches for a word that was designed to make it smaller. It is still there. It was there before the word and it is there after it. He looked at Cheryl. Your family's story is exactly as large as it has always been. Nothing that was said here today changes that. Cheryl Jackson looked at Steve Harvey for a moment. Then she said, in a voice that was so steady it was almost more powerful than anything else said in that room, "Thank you. Now let's finish the game." Steve Harvey smiled, slowly, with genuine warmth, the smile of someone who has just watched a person demonstrate something and is acknowledging it fully. He nodded. He straightened his jacket. He turned to the audience and said simply, "That is that family right there." The applause that followed was not the reflexive kind. It was the kind that comes from a room that has been through something together and is expressing, in the only collective way available to it, that it has received what just happened and knows what it means. The Jacksons played the rest of the game with a quality of focus that was different from what it had been before the pause. Not sharper exactly, it had already been sharp. Different in the way that the quality of a person's attention changes when something has been said that confirms, rather than undermines, who they are. Jalen was fast and precise, his spreadsheet preparation showing in every answer he gave. Amara was creative and accurate, finding the non-obvious answer that the survey confirmed was the one. Marcus was what Marcus always was, reliable, steady, present. Ruth continued to answer questions with the complete authority of a woman who has been studying human beings for 74 years and does not need a spreadsheet. And Cheryl led her team the way she led her organization and her staff and her family through everything else, from the front with clarity, without fuss. They won the main game. They went to fast money with Marcus going first and Jalen going second. Marcus scored 134 points. Jalen at the podium with his careful preparation and his competitive fire, and the specific added weight of a young black law student who had just watched his family handle something on national television that they should not have had to handle. Jalen answered 5 questions in 20 seconds with an accuracy and a speed that the production team said was one of the strongest fast money performances they had seen all season. His answers hit in the top spots on 4 of the 5 questions. The family total was 318 points. The Jacksons had won $20,000. When Steve Harvey handed Cheryl the check, the room was already on its feet. He held her hand for a moment after she took it and said something to her that the cameras caught, but that the broadcast chose, at the family's request, not to include with audio. Whatever it was, Cheryl looked at him and nodded once, with an expression that contained gratitude and dignity in equal measure, and did not require anything more from anyone. Ruth, who had sat with her hands folded through the entire afternoon with the composed attention of a woman at a church service she has attended many times and knows well, stood up when the check appeared and allowed herself, for the first time since the taping began, to show the full version of her reaction. She stood up and she put her hands together and she said out loud to nobody and everybody, "Thank you, Lord." The audience heard it. Several people cried. Steve Harvey did not look away. The episode aired 7 weeks later. The segment, Steve's response to the comment, the specificity of what he said, the sentence Cheryl gave him when he was finished, spread immediately and broadly. Not in the chaotic, outrage-driven way that stories about racist incidents often spread online, pulled in every direction by every possible political interpretation. In a different way, in the quieter, more durable way of something that gets shared by people who are not sharing it to prove a point, but because it said something they needed to hear said in exactly the way it was said. Cheryl's response, "Thank you. Now let's finish the game," became the phrase most associated with the clip. People quoted it the way they quote things that crystallize a truth. It appeared on social media accounts, in newsletters, in a surprising number of sermon illustrations. A high school English teacher in Memphis built a lesson around it about the difference between responding and reacting. A therapist in Chicago used the clip in group sessions with clients who were navigating workplace discrimination, because it demonstrated, cleanly and in real time, what healthy dignity actually looks like in the body, what it sounds like, what it does and does not do. The disability advocates and labor organizations and other groups who had been sharing Steve Harvey's previous interventions added this one to the canon. Several pieces were written in the weeks following the broadcast about the cumulative record he had been building, not as a controversialist or as an activist, but simply as a person who, when something wrong happened in his room, addressed it. The consistency of it was noted. The absence of performance in it was noted. The fact that he never seemed to be responding to a moment in order to look good, but in order to handle it correctly, that was noted as well, and noted as the difference between having a platform and using it. Cody Aldridge did not make any public statement. His wife gave a brief, private apology to Cheryl in the green room after the taping that Cheryl received without drama and without requiring anything further from it. What people do with the moments when they are shown clearly who they have been is between them and time. What was in the room that afternoon was addressed in the room, and what came after it was between the people involved. Cheryl talked about the taping in an interview she gave 3 months after the episode aired. She said that the thing she wanted to say most clearly was not about what Cody had said, which she had heard versions of her entire life, and which had, by this point, lost its ability to surprise her even when it still retained its ability to hurt. What she wanted to talk about was her mother. She said that watching Ruth put her hand over hers in that moment, the 3 seconds, the silent communication, the complete adequacy of it, had reminded her of something she had understood intellectually for a long time but had experienced again, viscerally, in that moment. That the most important resource any person has when they encounter something like what was said that afternoon is not their own strength. It is the people around them. It is the history that is standing with them. It is the knowledge that they are not encountering the ugliness alone and never have been. She said her mother had been putting her hand over hers in difficult moments since she was a child. She said that gesture, repeated over decades across dozens of hard situations, had built something in her that no one else's words could dismantle. She said that was what she wanted people to take from the whole afternoon, not that a bad thing was said, and a good response followed, though both of those things were true. She wanted them to think about who was standing with them in their hard moments, whether they were showing up for the people in their lives the way Ruth showed up for her, whether the people around them knew in their body and not just in their head that they were not facing whatever came at them alone. She said that was the more important story. The rest of it was just television. She went back to Atlanta and ran her nonprofit. She served thousands of families. She paid her staff on the 1st of every month. She showed up to the office and she did the work, the way she had always done the work, because the work was there to be done, and she was the person who had decided to do it, and a bad minute on a game show was not going to change either of those facts. Jalen went back to law school. He did not change his spreadsheet methodology. He did tell the story of the afternoon to his law school study group, and the conversation that followed was one of the most substantive conversations that group had during the entire first year. Several of his classmates said later that it changed the way they thought about certain things they were going to encounter in courtrooms, about the specific skill of maintaining your composure when someone is trying to use a word or a framing to diminish you or your client, and about the difference between responding from a place of anger and responding from a place of clarity. Jalen said that was not a distinction he had learned in law school. He had learned it at home. He had learned it from watching his grandmother and his mother move through the world for his entire conscious life. Ruth continued to attend the same church she had joined in 1973. She continued to have opinions about most things and continued to express them with the directness of a woman who has earned the right not to soften the edges unnecessarily. She watched the episode when it aired sitting in the same armchair she had been sitting in for years. When the moment came, her hand over Cheryl's hand, she watched it once briefly and then looked away and said to the room in general, "That's right." Then she watched the rest of the episode. Then she went to bed. She slept well. The thing about dignity is that it is not a single act. It is not a statement or a moment or a response that goes viral. It is a posture built and maintained over time, practiced in the small moments so that when the large moments arrive there is something solid to stand on. Ruth had been building it for 74 years. Cheryl had been building it for 49. They walked into that studio with it already fully formed, and what happened there that afternoon did not create it and could not destroy it, and in the end could not even dent it, because dignity built at that depth does not dent. It absorbs. It holds. It puts one hand over another hand for 3 seconds and says, without any words at all, "I am here. We are still standing." Nothing that just happened changed anything that matters. Steve Harvey said it correctly on that stage. The family's story was exactly as large as it had always been. Nothing that was said changed that. And $20,000 in prize money and a moment that reached millions of people, and a clip that showed exactly what composed, grounded, unshakable dignity looks like in a human body. Those things did not change the size of the story either. The story was already large. It had been large for decades, in the city of Atlanta, in the offices of a nonprofit, on the sidelines of a football field, in the rooms of a family where a grandmother's hand on a daughter's hand had been the language of solidarity for a very long time. It did not need television to be large. It just needed, for one afternoon, for television to look at it and see it clearly. If this story reached you, if it reminded you of someone in your life who carries their dignity the way Ruth and Cheryl carry theirs, or if it made you think about whether you are showing up for the people around you the way they deserve to be shown up for, sit with that. And then do something with it. Share this with someone who needs to be seen today. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of this story stayed with you, because this community shows up in the comments, and your voice here is part of what makes this space matter. And if you are not already here with us, subscribe right now, because every single week we come back with stories like this one. Stories about the people who build their dignity in the dark and show it in the light. Stories about what it looks like when someone refuses to be made smaller than they are. And stories about the moments when the room gets quiet and the right person says the right thing and everybody in the room knows, in their body, that something just happened that they are going to carry for a very long time. We will see you in the next one.